Our next talk is about ethics in technology, and it's presented by Vesna Manojlovic.
Hvala. Dobar dan. Drago mi je da sam ponovo na balkonu u Novom Sadu i hvala na gostoprimstvu. The rest of the talk will be in English. Why this talk? Why ethics in technology? And why this sign of yin and yang? So, when I started working with internet technologies, it was 25 years ago. I was studying to be an engineer. I was studying computer science, and I was a techno-optimist. I believed that science and engineering and technology and the internet are making the world a better place. And so that's represented with this white area of the symbol of yin and yang. And then about 5 years ago, I kind of turned towards the techno-pessimism, and I started seeing this new world of technologies that we are building as being actually building dystopian society, something like Black Mirror, and that's represented with this black part of the yin and yang symbol. And then I started questioning, like, really, do I still want to be busy with this? Like, I thought I'm part of the good guys. And then, therefore, I started exploring this gray area between these two attitudes of techno-optimism and techno-pessimism. And for me, that is the study of the ethics, of the study of values. Why are the technologies either used for good or for bad? And so that's the reason behind the talk. And for my work, I am a community builder. So for many, many years, since the first time I came to Balkan, I came here to promote the RIPE Atlas, which is one of the projects of the RIPE NCC, the organization that I work for. So in this talk, I'm also going again to talk a little bit about RIPE Atlas as a use case for applied ethics in internet measurements. And so if you want to contact me later, you can find me at RIPE meetings, RIPE website, and RIPE.net email address. So I gave a similar talk this year already at FOSDEM and then at SHA, and now for the third time. And every time the talk is becoming longer and longer, I keep adding more and more slides, and it's always just 1 hour time slot. So I don't know how far I will get in this slide deck. And the slides are available to be downloaded. The recording will be available. And also after the talk, I would like to have some time for questions and answers. And I also have some of these RIPE Atlas probes that I will talk about. So there are several parts. And if I get to the question everything, I have reached my goal. And all the rest is a bonus. So I will go first through some historical overview of in general, the questions of ethics in technology, then about RIPE NCC and RIPE Atlas, and then how can we actually find a better way to deal with technologies. And the answer is to actually, there is not one answer. You always have to keep on questioning your values, your involvement, your actions. I am by training an engineer. My job is not even engineering anymore. It is the translating between the users and the geeks and the techies, so the community building. And so I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a social scientist, and these are the people that actually study the ethics. So I had to learn a lot, I had to study a lot of other people's works, and these are the inspirations, and there's many, many more at the end of the talk in the links. So if you want to dig deeper into this, these are the works that I can recommend. They're not very long, they're kind of easy to read and really, really useful. So the ethics is the study of values. In short, here is the long definition. and I will be mostly talking about the applied ethics, because this is what concerns us when we are building the technologies, when we are building the internet. So this is another handy pie chart that I created by trying to figure out why is it so difficult to merge the ethical studies with the actual hard sciences, let's say. And then so there is this split. There are all these categories in the scientific approach that make it easier to actually focus on one thing at a time and to be really specific and to study in a real detail, for example, medicine or the physical sciences. But that also brings a lot of problems of the silo way of thinking and not being able to combine other disciplines in your own research. So one of the advices that came from all this study that I conducted for myself is the advantages of interdisciplinary approach and working as much as possible with people from completely different sides than your own, so that you get out of your bubble, get out of your silo thinking, and learn from other disciplines. So in a lot of classical sciences, the people have been wondering, and they were having all these moral dilemmas. For example, with developing nuclear technologies, how dangerous are they for the planet and for the people? In the medical sciences, they actually developed this code of Hippocrates, where all the doctors actually have to follow a specific ethical code, and they keep on re-evaluating their involvement with, for example, studies of the animals, or is it ethical to test certain drugs on humans, although it is going to bring long-term benefits, how much suffering is it actually admissible according to their ethics? And in the environmental movement, of course, the Silent Spring was a crucial work in the 60s. And so this is repeated, just without the pictures. And now we go to the technical sciences, and I want to just restate this and not actually explain it. The technical is political. So the rest of my talk is actually going to go into the details of this, but here it is summarized for you. And then I want to state even further that programming is also political, and actually almost everything that you do is political. The language itself, the objects that we are dealing with, the translations are political. Crypto, that most of you here are actually busy with, code is political. That's actually a name of the book that is going to be mentioned later. And from the feminist studies, the personal is also political. So a bit more in detail of the computer sciences. What are the ethical dilemmas? Well, we have seen Edward Snowden, who has been mentioned already at this conference many times. The privacy that is being kind of attacked by our own people, like the programmers and the coders who have gone to the dark side, let's say. And then artificial intelligence and other areas of computer science that have been used for the purposes that were probably not intended by the original programmers and the database builders, and so on. So in other areas of modern sciences, like nanotechnology and the internet protocols itself, how much of the consideration for the human rights are built into all these sciences? So these are huge areas of research and study that I cannot really cover in this talk. So I will go a little bit deeper into like some even smaller parts of the internet technologies, and that is the free software and the hackers communities and the cryptographers. So the internet, to me, when I started, was a cool new technology. But very soon, it actually became a technology for connecting with other people. And this was 25 years ago. So by now, internet is not only a technological system, it's a socio-technological system. And it has been now involved in so many areas of our lives that it is not admissible anymore that the decisions about the building blocks of the internet are made only by the engineers and the techies, without regarding the needs and the opinions of the ordinary users, because by now they're also impacted with the developments in the internet and web and networking and technology services and so on. So how can we implement these ethics if these people are not even involved in any of the decision-making processes of building the internet? Well, the people that develop software have tried to deal with this, and they have this movement of creating free software. And these are the clearly ethical reasons for certain ways of software development. And so they value the individual freedoms to use the software and to study the programs, but also on a society level, it should be possible to share the code of the software and to share the copies of the program and to modify it so that you can learn from it, and also to improve it to do something that you would like to do. So the philosophy of free software is probably known to all of you. However, we still, or at least I have to fight every time not to say open source software when I actually mean free software. So even within these movements, many years ago there has been a split between the open source software, which is a bit more commercially marketing kind of approach to the similar values, and the hardliners that are more talking about the ethical values of the software rather than the commercial and the marketing value. And then we have the hackers community. A lot of people in this Congress identify as being a hacker. And so there is also a kind of codified hackers ethics. And so this is one of the examples of the hackers ethics. And this is the definition. However, this will be questioned later on. So probably everybody is familiar with this, so I won't spend too time on that. And this is probably the most interesting slide for the cryptographers in the audience. So it's advice which is created by an academic who was shocked by the Edward Snowden's revelations and started questioning his own colleagues and his own moral values, thinking like, how did we get to this? How come that my colleagues, cryptographers, could not prevent this from happening, have actually helped this to happen, but let's say that there are people who wanted to prevent this. Where did they go wrong? And where can we fix this? How can we fix this? So he came up with all these tips. For example, choose the projects based on the social value that they are going to bring, not only what is going to improve your academic portfolio, and so on. So these are kind of very nice tips to give to your students. And then if you are more into engineering, there is this movement called critical engineering. So also a manifesto or a list of tips for the engineers. If you do want to help to improve the society that you are part of, how can you do that? So this is also a nice document to refer to. And now I will go to a bit of a core of this talk, and that is, how do these ethics apply to the measurements field? So there was a group of people that got together and they first went into the theory. So this is like the summarized theory of ethics. And they started kind of trying to summarize this for the engineers. So from philosophers to engineers, and they came up with several ways of looking into ethics. So the first one is utilitarianism. So if you're choosing what to do with your project, you can take a look at what are the aims of what is your software going to be used for, and if the uses that you intended the software to be used for are good, then it's fine. then you're okay. If some people choose to use it for something else, it's not your problem. Okay, that's one approach. Then there is the virtue ethics. Well, there's deontology, but that's too complicated, and I will not explain it now, because I can't even deal with that. Then there is the virtue ethics. So that's like, if I'm a good person and I write software, then the software that I produce is going to be a good software, right? So some people think like that, like because I'm okay, then the software that I produce will be okay. Then there is principalism, which says choose a set of principles and make sure that your end product is actually going to be according to those principles, like respect for the autonomy of the user, or respect of the autonomy of the coder. So that can be one of the principles. Beneficence, is it going to bring the most good for most people? Is it not going to harm anybody? Or is it going to be used for the just causes? So let's say don't write code for military. So these are some of the principles. And then some other people say, well, it's not good enough to use just one of these. Let's use a combination of them, the pluralism, and then make a subset, make a mix of them that suits our goals. Okay, so they looked into that, and then they applied that to the measurements of the internet. So if you start collecting data about the internet users, how can you make sure that your measurement project is not going to harm anyone? And do you implement these ethics at the beginning of the project, or do you just devise something and then later think, oh, did we think about the user? Why? Well, again, because the internet is not only a technological system anymore. People's private details are being collected as a part of the internet measurement project, let's say. And the people who write this code have responsibilities to the people who are less technical. So people who write the code for the measurements are in the power position above those users who actually don't even know what's happening to them. So therefore, the software developers have more responsibilities that they have to take on themselves. And one of those responsibilities is to obtain the meaningful informed consent from the people that they collect the data of. And that means it's very, very hard to explain all these technical concepts to the people who actually don't really know what they're doing, and they will just click on I agree. And then you think, well, they said they agreed, but did they actually understand what did they agree to? And so on and so on. So there is a lot of things to take into consideration. And not condoning potentially unethical research methods. This is more important for the conference organizers, actually, and the academic journals who receive a lot of research papers, and they have the power to actually not accept the unethical research methods. So the papers that have been based on obtaining the data in the unethical way should not be accepted. So that's a kind of a tricky situation when you're organizing a conference and you actually want a lot of presenters, or you actually even want some controversial papers, but you should not be accepting the work that has been collecting the data using the unethical methods. And here's a handy chart on how to actually implement all of these things while creating a measurement or organizing a conference or making like a large software project. Any questions until now? Or will you wait until the end? Okay. Then I move on to the actual example of how to put all these ethical dilemmas and ethical principles in practice. So I'll start with the introduction to the RIPE NCC. How many of you know about RIPE NCC? Okay, there is still a few who don't, so I will explain. So that stands for Réseau IP Européen, Network Coordination Center. So it was actually formed in '92, and the RIPE itself, the first part of the name was formed in 1989. That was a time when people thought that a mix of French and English is a cool thing for acronyms. So so the RIPE itself is a community of the operators of IP networks in Europe, and the RIPE NCC is an organization which is the network coordination center for that community. It's one of the 5 regional internet registries, and the other 4, well, you can see around the world, and on the top is IANA, Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. So the regional internet registry is an organization that has as a main goal distributing IP resources. So IPv4, IPv6 addresses, AS numbers, and then keeping a database of those resources. So who are they delegated to? And because it's by its nature kind of a monopolistic organization, because there's just one on the whole continent, everybody who wants to be in the internet business has to come to the regional internet registry to get their resources. And so it has to be an organization which is very neutral and impartial and fair to everybody, very transparent and open and accepting everybody who wants to be in the internet business to be a member. But it's also a not-for-profit organization, because it's not fair that we would make a lot of money from people who don't have anywhere else to go. So it's the RIPE NCC is the one which is in Amsterdam for Europe, Central Asia, and Middle East, and it's registered in Holland. And there is a lot of provisions for the not-for-profit membership organizations. So it's an association where all these organizations are members of, and they can vote on how is this organization going to operate. And so the main job is to distribute IP addresses. The rules, so-called policies, are decided by all the members and by the community of RIPE. And so in addition to this main job, we also have other projects like collecting a lot of internet measurement data. Because we are already a neutral, impartial, open and transparent organization that everybody trusts, so everybody has to trust, they also trust us with running this kind of measurement collection and trusting us that we are going to do it in the ethical way. So I'll get back to that. Let's talk first about the IP addresses distribution. So this is how it happens. It's quite hierarchical. And so IANA sits on top of the whole address pool, the global IPv6 address pool, and then IANA gives large blocks of addresses to the regional registries. They give large-ish blocks of addresses to the local internet registries, mostly ISPs, and they distribute addresses to their customers, to the end users. And there are also some other ways which is provider-independent addresses. And this is the address space type that we would really like to promote to everybody, IPv6, which stands for Internet Protocol version 6 addresses, because we ran out of IPv4 globally several years ago, and so we still have a little bit left for the people who are latecomers in the internet business, so they can still connect to the other sites on the internet. So if you now want to start up the internet business and you want to get addresses from the RIPE NCC, you get 1,024 addresses. That's it. And everybody gets 1,024 addresses, and for the rest you can ask for IPv6. Okay, and now for the RIPE Atlas. So how many of you know about RIPE Atlas? It's probably the same people. So RIPE Atlas is a distributed measurement platform. It consists of the hardware boxes distributed by RIPE NCC and hosted by the volunteers around the world. And these devices do the measurements from everywhere where they are plugged in to critical internet infrastructure, which is the 13 root name servers, but because those are anycasted, then there's about 300 locations to which each one of these probes does the measurements. And which are the measurements? Well, it's a ping, trace route, and DNS. Those are the standard ones. And then sometimes you can also ask it to do the SSL, NTP, or HTTP to some different targets, which we call anchors. And so the data is collected by RIPE NCC. It is stored on our servers and then published for everybody to access. So it's an open data, and there is a lot of ways that you can download it. And if you are hosting one of these probes, you also get a possibility to create your own measurements from all of the other 10,000 probes. So the probe in your house is actually useful for other people. And if you are hosting a probe, you earn the right to use other people's measurements points around the world. And so you can use it for, let's say, reachability measurements of the server that you deploy, and you deploy it here in Novi Sad, and then you want to see how many servers or how many hosts from Brazil or Japan or Australia or Canada can reach it, and how long is the latency, and which AS numbers actually drop the packets, and so on. We then also do a lot of analysis of this data. So most of the users are either the researchers who actually love the fact that we have stored 5 years of data, and they can just access it and make analysis of, let's say, what happens if a storm hits New York, how does the traffic patterns change then? Or if there is an earthquake in Nepal, which services are affected and for how long? Or the network operators, as I said, you don't need friends anymore to ask them, can you do the trace route for me from Brazil? You can just use RIPE Atlas. And so there are all kinds of ways that you can access information about it. And so some people actually try to use it for the detection of interference or censorship. And they wrote a paper, and they compared RIPE Atlas with other platforms that are used for the censorship measurements. And so actually RIPE Atlas is not the best one for using for that, because we don't measure the web traffic. We don't do HTTP measurements. And that was a conscious decision because of the ethical considerations that we took at the beginning of developing this network. So that's this last point. So we kept set of measurements very limited, although we knew that this is actually going to limit the value of the measurement network, because a lot of people actually want this, and we have to tell them, sorry, you can't have that, you have to go somewhere else. Because we didn't want to place the hosts of these probes in danger. And we had a lot of discussions in the community about these things later on, when we tried to actually change the design and allow some more measurements, and then the community said, no, we also think that it's better not to do that. So from the beginning, we also decided to only do active measurements. So we don't observe the existing traffic that happens in your network. We generate our own traffic, so we create our own pings and trace routes. And so therefore, you cannot, for example, measure the speed of your connection or the bandwidth of your connection, because we don't know that. We don't want to measure that. We also have chosen to keep our information as open as possible and as free as possible. And then again, we don't want to put the host in danger, because people actually host these probes at home. And then we don't want to put the cat in danger either. So this is like a mandatory cat picture in every presentation, but this time with a handily available RIPE Atlas probe. So this project has started in 2010. Those were the design principles. And then we started kind of talking to the community, and they started asking us things and sometimes difficult questions, and they were like, wait a minute, why should we trust the code on this just because you are from the RIPE NCC? And so we did open the source code, so now you can get that code on GitHub and install it somewhere else and then compare the measurements that the probe does and that your machine does and kind of verify what do we do. Then we started asking people, well, is it okay if we actually make all the measurements public? Because actually it's possible to create a measurement which you mark private or kind of non-public, and then you are the only one benefiting from the results. And we thought that's not really fair for the community, like you're using 1,000 probes from other people, and then you are the only one accessing the results. And then the community said, no, actually, there is a value in creating some of those non-public measurements, but we also had to keep calling it non-public with quotation marks, because there is nothing private if you are part of this measurement network. In the aggregate, we will publish those results anyway. They just won't be easily findable through some of the tools on the web and so on. And your IP address is always going to be public anyway. So we can't really call anything private there, except for your actual personal details, which have nothing to do with the measurements anyway. In 2015, we also had to kind of keep on explaining to people why are we not going to allow HTTP measurements to any random targets, because that would actually put the host in danger. For example, you are in a country which is banning certain websites, and let's say that that's Italy. And then somebody from Brazil schedules a measurement from the probe in Italy to that forbidden website, because they don't know the Italian laws. And then the host of the probe in Italy might get into trouble, and then trying to explain to the police, but it wasn't me, it was somebody else, and they were just using this hardware in my house, and so on. So we were like, no, let's not do that. So again, this is one of the features that people keep asking for, and we have to keep on telling them, no, you can't have that, because of the ethical reasons. And then again, we thought, well, let's have a third party to do security audit, because although we, of course, designed the probe to not be hackable, that's the greatest thing to tell to any hackers community, like, but you can't hack this. They're like, oh, really? So yeah, then we also had a third-party security audit, and they published the results, and they told us how to actually improve security some more, and so on. So the results of this are also publicly available. And then this year, as a consequence of me going to the RightsCon, where the people who are concerned with human rights in the internet usage, they also took a look at using the RIPE Atlas for measuring the internet disruptions. Like if the internet in a country is shut down, how can you measure that? How can you prove who was doing it, who was not doing it, who was complying with the laws, why were they doing it, and so on. And for some of these purposes, they can actually use RIPE Atlas. And they also warned us about some other technical considerations that we didn't think about if people start using RIPE Atlas for these purposes. So we still have some work to do. And as I said, we are also friends with the people in a lot of hackerspaces and hackers conferences, and they don't like to trust authority. They don't trust their friends either. So they opened the probe and they connected other devices to it to measure what does it actually happen on the wire when this probe is in your network. And so they reported it to us first. And so we have this page about responsible disclosure. So if you find something in the functioning of the probe, please let us know first. And then we will give you credits on this page and say, yes, you discovered it first, and we fixed it, and then we published your findings. People from a lot of hackerspaces also host the probe, and if you would like one for your hackerspace, let me know. On the hackerspaces.org, there is a RIPE Atlas tag, let's say, where you can add your probe to your hackerspace page, and then it will show on a certain map there, and so there is quite a link between the hackers community and the RIPE Atlas project. We also organize a lot of hackathons. They're great fun, and there are great prizes. It's stroopwafels. That's a special Dutch cookie. Well, for people in Serbia, maybe it's not such an interesting thing because you have sweeter things here. But it's quite a treat. Everybody loves stroopwafels, and people are quite happy to come to the hackathon and to work for stroopwafels. And so, why did we start doing this? Well, it's a great way to actually bring together the people from different groups, like network operators and researchers and coders and designers, and put them in the same room, feed them pizza, and then come up with great, crazy ideas. First for the RIPE Atlas, but then later we started having different topics like about other RIPE NCC services, and a lot of useful tools were developed. So the next hackathon has a topic of IPv6. It's happening in Copenhagen. There are still some places available, so you can apply following that link. And these are some great laptops of people who come to hackathons. Now, another thing that you might be interested in, the RIPE community organizes 2 meetings per year. They're quite large meetings, about 500 people, mostly network operators. And we started bringing in people from the academic community with this support program called RACI. So if you are an academic or a researcher, you can apply, and then we will pay for your ticket and the travel and accommodation, and you get to meet all these network operators and to present your work, to get feedback on your research, and to actually persuade them how is your new cool technology actually going to make their life more complicated in 5 years. And if you would like to learn more about the RIPE topics, or if you would like to reach the RIPE community, we have a publishing platform called RIPE Labs, where you can read a lot of interesting articles, but also publish your own work. So there are a lot of ways that you can join us, and a lot of ways you can contact us. How am I doing with time? Okay. So now we go beyond the traditional hacker's ethics. And these are some of the ways that you can question the hacker's ethics as it was presented in that book. The first way is to question the let's say, mainstream way how media portrays hackers. And so this female hacker actually created a website where you can choose to change some of these parameters and create another way of how does the hacker look like. So does it have to be a white guy with a hoodie, or can it be, does it have to be a person drinking mate? No, it can be a different choice of drink, it can be a different hairstyle, it can be a different color of skin and a different gender. Now, Alison Parrish gave this talk called Toward a New Hacker Ethic, and her proposal is not to come up with like a code of 5 points, but to come up with a lot of questions that are going to help you to decide, is your work actually confirming to your own values? And so, for example, the third one, mistrust authority and promote decentralization. What system of authority am I enacting through what I make? And what systems of support do I rely on? So a lot of hackers think, well, I'm an individual and I'm independent and I'm the only one developing this code, without realizing that they actually do rely on all kinds of system of supports, and that they own the responsibility to those systems of support to kind of help them through their work, and so on. So these are some kind of questions. Then, if you are into network systems, there is this website, network system ethics.net, and they post like 20 questions. I had to cut them here because there is much more and it doesn't fit on the slide. So if you're interested in that, these are all kinds of questions that you can ask yourselves when you are starting a new project. So what kind of data am I collecting? How many personal lives are going to be impacted with this data that I gather? If I choose to group them in a certain way or in another way, are the conclusions going to be different? Am I breaking some laws? Do I care? Who am I going to harm? And so on and so on. And again, the cryptography professor also said, also ask not only is this the coolest way that I can create the algorithm, but why is this technology became this way? Who is it helping and who is this technology actually harming? So, okay, let's say that you are now convinced and you want to develop alternative way of thinking about your programming. How can you do that? Well, there are all kinds of other areas from which you can borrow different ways of looking at things. For example, how would the feminist internet look like? So there was this group of scientists and hackers and women, and they came up with 20 feminist principles of the internet. So you can find them on this website. So how could you design websites or internet protocols that would not condone the violence towards users? And how is the privacy built into your tools? And so on. Then there are also ethics of nonviolence. So there are now specialized conferences, for example, open source and feelings, that are discussing the impact of the technologies to the mental health of both users and developers. And there is many talks about empathy in leadership and empathy in the hackers communities. So quite interesting reads if you are interested in such thing. And my personal favorite, the nonviolent communication, which is on one hand kind of a communication technique developed for like the peace negotiations, but it's actually a set of steps. It's almost an algorithm which is very much suitable for the mind of the programmers. So I really recommend it, and there is a lot of other talks that do like nonviolent communication for software developers. Then there are people who actually gave a talk at CCC Congress called the Invisible Committee. They are an anarchist group, and they call for embedding more of the anarchist values into the hackers community. And so activism and freedom, but not individual freedom, but the freedom of connections between different groups and the hackers community in general. And so these are some of the other ethics and principles that you can embed, like the green anarchy or the Burning Man or the Buddhist values or the permaculture values. So a lot of them are actually a way of hackers' approach to other parts of the society. And I think that the hackers communities can benefit from connecting with these other communities and learning from them. I'll go quickly through this and then leave some time for questions. So, if you are a techno-optimist, then this might be shocking, but if you're already a techno-pessimist, then you know all about this. So, we are used to the mobile phones being used for tracking, but then somebody in the 80s already wrote that if somebody would have told you at any moment, you need to carry this surveillance device, tracking device on you at all times. It can listen to you. It can take the photos by being controlled remotely. It has a GPS tracker, and it can know who did you talk with and where did you go. You would, of course, say, no way, you cannot control me, and I'm not going to do that. But if they say, oh, it's a new gadget, then people would just do it voluntarily. And it's not a new thing. This was actually predicted in the 80s already by a guy who was studying like the philosophy of technology. And then there are other dark sides of the new technologies. For example, the exploitation of the humans that are working in obtaining the resources for all the gadgets that we use, and then the violence that is used against them to force them into the mines, although they are only children, or to force them to work in the iPhone factories. And then what happens with the electricity and all the other energy that we need to power all these devices, and then we finally discard them and then make a lot of pollution. And then some people say, well, that's what you get in the capitalistic society, and the internet is only the mirror to the society, or is it an enabler of actually keeping the status quo? And again, the similar picture, so kind of a digital divide. In the first world countries, we get these shiny data centers and a lot of cables, and then in the third world country, that's where we get the resources from, or this is where we discard our gadgets when we don't want them anymore. And even worse, we destroy the habitat for the animals. But don't worry, the animals are fighting back. So apparently, this is actually from the Hackers Conference 4 years ago in Holland, where there were squirrels that were actually chewing on the fiber optic cable and causing the outage of the internet for our hackers camping. And there is this Twitter account which actually lists all the power cuts and the internet cuts caused by rodents, specifically squirrels. And so they are the biggest threat to the quality of the internet and to the availability of the internet, bigger than the terrorists. So again, since we are building the internet and we have the great power, with that great power comes the great responsibility. I'll stop there because I have only 10 more minutes, and I'll open up for questions. Let's keep it here.
Hi, I'm Alex.
Yo, I'm Alex. I'm a qualitative researcher, focusing on many things, internet and human rights. But yeah, hackers love to disrupt things. Taxi drivers, mom and pop stores are recent examples. And yeah, disrupting research as well. I'm very grateful things like Skyhub for disrupting the stupid academic publishing industry. But I'm seriously considering a career change because yeah, I don't want to go into academic research, and yeah, it's changing in academic research as well. But yeah, quite hard to get funding if you're focusing on internet policy and you don't have research methods that involve, you know, cool things with blinking lights hooked up to LANs. You can't do like data and algorithms. So yeah, considering a career change, considering, I don't know, learning something like Python, and yeah, what do you guys have to say about invading the space of traditional researchers? I know many of you have not necessarily just been hackers your whole life, and you may have studied social sciences or read a lot. So, but yeah, there's a lot of disruption, and you know, whether true research can be done with algorithms and data, I'm very, very skeptical.
Thank you for that question. I'll try to answer, and if anybody else wants to answer, please grab the mic. I recommend multidisciplinary teams. So don't do it yourself. Do it together with somebody who is already a Python programmer and has slightly similar inclinations like you, but then you, at least like if there's two of you, it's better if there's more of you. You can complement each other. So you can bring the social sciences way of thinking to the programming, and they can do the programming part for you. It's going to be much faster. You will slowly learn, and they will slowly learn from you. That's one advice. The second one is go to the hacker spaces. They really need people like you. And it won't be very welcoming to start with, but just keep on going there and try to talk with them. And that's also how you will learn from them, but hopefully they will learn from you too. And third, there is a collective in Amsterdam called Data Active. It's like a research collective about data and human rights. I'll give you the details later.
Talk to me afterwards.
Anyone else? Okay.
Hi. The RIPE Atlas, how does it get updates?
It has automatic firmware updates that we push. So as long as it's connected, it gets, when we publish the new firmware, it kind of checks the firmware version and then it gets a new one.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions, I have more slides, so don't worry, we'll use up the time.
It's sort of tangentially related to this question. Some of the things you referenced use hacker in a different meaning from the hacker as a ethical system. And it's very common to do that. Like, a lot of people get that it's like not just exploiting systems, but some people just use hacker to mean anything involving computers. And, well, that's relevant to some of this. It looked like the image of the hacker as being white male is something that's applied to generally programming, and it's separate from the hacker ethical system, for example. And I don't know. I don't know why I mentioned this. It's just like, I think, well, no, I can frame it as a question, so I'm not just the annoying questioner who's making a comment. Do you have any comments on this?
My definition of a hacker is very, very broad. So I personally do not subscribe to the very narrow definition of the hacker, and that's why I invite everybody else to question their own view of what the hacker is and what the hacker is supposed to be and what do they think they are as a hacker. So I'm not going to prescribe anybody the definition of the hacker. I'm just asking everybody to question it themselves and to create their own.
Hello. I see this slide, and in my mind comes a friend of mine that he told me that we as hackers, as programmers, as sysadmins, as various kind of professions inside this field, we have a lot of power. For example, what would happen if one day all of the hackers, all of the sysadmins, all of the programmers wouldn't work for a day? Wouldn't work for a day. So what would happen then? This would be something like a strike. This gives them yes, this gives them a lot of power and a lot of negotiation power. However, on the other hand, we see that the companies and the big companies and all give more and more money and give more and more salaries to these people, and they distract them from some cause that they might want to attend or gonna go. How how can we persuade people like this? How can we change people like this? These are questions that you probably can answer, but I want your opinion also.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you came up with that idea yourself. So spread the idea, and then maybe one day we can organize a worldwide strike of the sysadmins. That would be great. I would love to see that. And how can we make more people to think that way? By engaging. So just bring that question to everywhere where you go, and then ask all these sysadmins that you know, like, well, why are you doing that? And what would happen if you decide not to work? And what would be the reason that you would decide not to work? How far would you go if somebody would tell you, yeah, that's also not very strange example, to write the face recognition software, like if you're a programmer, or to maintain a database that is going to be used to target people based on the face recognition software. Oh, but I'm just doing my work. You know, like how far would you go in just doing your work? And then people will slowly start questioning that themselves, because any other way is not going to work either. And if we would propose any other way, like let's make them think that way, we would just become like the others already are, and that's not what we want, I think. So.
All right, we have one more question.
How would you protect against infiltration of traditional morality or dogmatic morality into this sort of field? This is one of my questions. I have another one, but
the same way. So question what your moral values are. Are they more aligned with the mainstream media and 8 o'clock news, or are they more alternative and more like from the hacker scene, or are they even more alternative than the hacker scene? And I personally think most of the hackers are kind of beyond the traditional morality, although I'm not really sure what you mean by that. I am more interested in making hackers question the neoliberal morality and neoliberal ideology, which in my circles is by now more traditional than any other traditional morality.
yeah. And the second question is basically how at one point you were talking about informed consent. How do you actually achieve informed consent? Because this is basically a very controversial topic. Yeah. Especially in medicine, because somebody who is not a doctor, how can I know what I'm consenting to? Yeah. Yeah,
it's similar to the medicine, but then also nowadays in sharing your personal data over the internet for the research purposes or like for the purposes of getting free goodies somewhere or whatever. It's very hard, and we have the problem with that with RIPE Atlas. But what I've learned yesterday on the conference is the power of storytelling. So we will try to redo our documentation in making it in the story format so that the people can actually understand what is it that they're getting into when they install one of these things in their home. So we'll try to do better. Everybody try to do better. This is my actual last slide. I skipped a few. So with great power comes great responsibility. Responsibility not only to the rest of the scientific and hackers community, but we have responsibility to the humanity in general. And I would even go beyond that. We also have the responsibility to the planet and to the rest of the living beings on this planet, which for me are symbolized by squirrels. So let's protect ourselves from ourselves, and let's protect the squirrels. Thank you.